Good. Okay, I'm going to begin. Just hope Sister Hooper comes on soon. All right, I'm going to begin. I'm going to notify Sister Hooper to come on now, but stay online for me.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, let us begin by going to God in prayer. Father in heaven, I give you thanks that the projector is now working. I pray that you may bless our class, that we may have a wonderful learning experience. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, as I call your name, I'd like you to let me know that you're there. Israel, are you there? Yes. Solin, are you there?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I'm there.
Good. Solin, are you there?
Yes, sir.
Wood is there. Richard Roy is there. Sister Hooper was here, but she left and told her to come back. Okay, we're going to be looking at lesson number 11. This is a continuation from last trimester. And this is the link to this new trimester. Last trimester, I closed with lesson 10, showing that the worldwide flood best explains the fossil record. And I'm going to be getting into more detail with that with lesson 11. Lesson 11 is entitled, The Worldwide Flood is the Key to Understand What the Fossil Record Shows Us and Why the Evolutionary Origin of Life and its Development is False. Let me define certain key words in the title of this lesson. Worldwide flood refers to the flood in the days of Noah, recorded in Genesis chapters 6, 7, and 8, when God sent a flood upon the entire world because of their disobedience. The fossil here refers to living things in the past that are now dead, whether they be human, animal, or plants. Evolutionary origin of life and its development refers to the theory of evolution that says that life originated from non-life and developed into different kinds of life from one common ancestor. That is, in a summary, what the theory of evolution teaches. So what we're going to be doing in this lesson is to show how the worldwide flood explains the presence of these past living persons and animals and plants that are in the rocks, and show that all of these living creatures were living at the same time the time when there was a worldwide flood in the days of Noah, and that they are not saying that life originated from non-life and developed from one common ancestor and diversified to produce different kinds of life that we have today. The general objectives of lesson number 11 are: 1, to examine evidences that the living things which are now fossils were all living at the same time. 2, to examine evidences that the living things which are now fossils were buried and fossilized first. When I say fossilized, I mean that these dead things turned into rock. They changed their nature and turned into rock. They not only were dead, but they turned into rock, and they were encased in rock. Number 3, to examine evidences that long periods of time are not necessary to explain the fossil record. The specific objectives of this lesson are: 1, at the end of this lesson, the students will have analyzed 2 evidences that the living things which are now fossils were all living at the same period of time, not different periods of time. 2, at the end of this lesson, the students will have discussed 4 evidences that the living things which are now fossils were buried and fossilized first. 3, at the end of this lesson, the students will have demonstrated from 4 evidences that living things which are now fossils did not need a long time to become fossils. 4, at the end of this lesson, the students will have proven that the fossils were formed after sin and death had entered the world and in the worldwide flood of Noah's time. First of all, then, let us look at the evidences that the living things which are now fossils were all living at the same time. Bear in mind, that is not what the theory of evolution says. The theory of evolution says that the different layers of rock are different periods of time, consisting of millions of years, and that the simplest organism is found in the first layer of rock, and then in the layer above that, you have a less simple organism, and in the layer above that, you have an even less simpler organism and a more complex organism, until you have the creatures that we see around us today. So there is a difference in the interpretation of the fossils that are in the rocks. So what I'm providing at this time are the evidences that the living things which are now fossils were all living at the same time. They were not living at different periods of time. Number 1, a rock layer named for a specific period of time contains fossils from different time periods according to the theory of evolution. Now, if the theory of evolution were true, you should not have fossils from different time periods in the same rock layer. You should have these different fossils in their correct layer of rock. But the fact that you find fossils that are thought to have developed in different periods of time and are in different rock layers, that you have them all in the same place, really shows that the theory of evolution is a wrong interpretation of the fossils that are in the rocks. So a rock layer named by the theory of evolution for a specific period of time contains fossils from different time periods, using the theory of evolution as the context in which I'm talking about different time periods. Here's a quote: "Fossils are being found in the wrong place all the time." And this is according to Michael Ord, who has his Master of Science in Atmospheric Science and is a researcher in earth science. And he wrote an article in the creation.com website entitled, "Are Fossils Ever Found in the Wrong Place?" When you get this PowerPoint, I would advise you to click on this link and it will take you to Michael Ord's article in which he will go into more detail. His article is entitled "Fossils Wrong Place." Now, it's not that they're in the wrong place. They're only in the wrong place according to those who believe in evolution. But the fact that they're found in different rock layers that don't correspond to the period of time that evolutionists say that they should be in, we find that the evolutionist says that they are in the wrong place. But how could that be? They're in the right place, because the fact is they were not in different time periods, but in one time period. Number two, there are vast fossil graveyards. And when I say fossil graveyards, I mean you have different animals and plants fossilized together, which according to the theory of evolution should not be together, because one should have evolved into the other, and the other should have evolved into still another kind of life. Yet all of these different animals and plants are found in the same place. So there are vast fossil graveyards found throughout the world, literally, consisting of animals and plants, which evolutionists have placed in different periods of time, represented by the different rock layers. But these animals and plants from so-called different periods of time are found mixed up together. Now, here are some specific examples. I will give you the place where it is found and what kind of animals and plants that were found in each location. Starting here now in Agate Springs, Nebraska, the United States of America, there is a fossil graveyard of about 9,000 animals and plants. You will find there rhinos or rhinoceroses, horses, camels, giant wild boars, birds, plants, trees, seashells, and fish. Now the thing is, the evolutionists say that the fish was our original ancestor. Our original ancestor, they say, lived in the water and was able at a certain time to evolve legs and walk out of the water and evolve lungs so that it could breathe on land, and it developed into reptiles that creep on the land, and the reptiles developed into mammals, and the mammals developed into the apes, and the apes developed into human beings. Now, how is it that you have fish in the same places with mammals, like horses? How is it that they say that reptiles evolved into birds, and yet you have birds along with reptiles. This is just a list of some of the animals. There were 9,000 animals. This is just trying to show how some of these animals were, who some of these animals were. If evolution were true, why is it that this which had evolved into an amphibian that can live both in the water and on land, and evolved into reptiles and then into birds, why is it that all of them are together in one big fossil graveyard in Agate Springs in the state of Nebraska, the United States of America? That does not support the theory of evolution. It contradicts it. Here is another place in the world that has fossil graveyards. In the Alaska, this is in the northwestern part of the United States. Maybe I should say the northwestern part. It is near the Arctic Circle. And Siberia is in the northeastern section of the continent of Asia. And these are cold places. These are freezing places. They're not far from each other. In the Alaska and Siberia area, there were found a graveyard of bears, wolf, fox, badgers, saber-tooth cat, jaguar, lynx, mammoth, mastodon, horses, camel, antelope, bison, caribou, moose, elk, sheep, musk ox, yak, ground sloth, and several rodents, all in the same place, consisting again of creatures that were thought to have evolved into more advanced creatures, yet they're all together in the same fossilized graveyard. In France, hundreds of thousands of marine creatures, that is, creatures that used to live in the sea, are buried with amphibians, that is, creatures that can live both in the water and on land. Yet marine creatures were to have evolved into amphibians. How is it we have them together? Marine creatures buried with amphibians, spiders, scorpions, millipedes, insects, and reptiles in a fossil graveyard. In Wyoming, United States of America, alligators, fish, birds, turtles, mammals, many varieties of insects and palm leaves are buried in the Green River. So my question about all of these fossil graveyards is, if these animals belonged to different periods of time and one had evolved into another, how is it that they were found buried together? The fact that they're buried together means that they were together at one time in life. These different creatures, they were together in life and they were together in death. If they didn't belong to the same period of time, they could not be buried together. It is people who are living in the same period of time that can be found together. Okay, for example, I can find my father and my grandmother in the same place. They're now dead and gone, but they're in the same place because they were buried at the same cemetery. Now, if these animals did not live together, how is it that they died together? And how is it that they were buried together? It just shows that they were living at the same time, not different periods of time. Now we are looking at evidences that these living things, which are now fossils, were buried and fossilized first. Again, fossilized means the process by which dead plants and animals and human beings turn into rock. So we're going to be looking at evidences that fossils were buried rapidly and also rapidly turned into rock and did not give time for them to decay or for them to be eaten up by scavengers, but that they were buried quickly and they turned into rock quickly. Number one, all around the world, in rock layer after rock layer, there are billions of dead things that have been buried in water, carried mud, and sand, which have now hardened into rock. Their state of preservation. Now notice I have made these words capitalized because I'm emphasizing it. Their state of preservation, that is, they are so well preserved that they could not have eventually and slowly been buried and eventually and slowly turn into rock. Otherwise, they would have decayed. But they're in such a great state of preservation, which frequently shows that there had to be rapid burial and fossilization, just like one would expect in the flood of Noah's time. So again, their state of preservation frequently shows that there had to be rapid burial and fossilization. Burial meaning that the great amount of water that was on the land drove a lot of stones and rocks and sand and mud over these drowned creatures and buried them quickly. And fossilization, the process of turning into rock, was rapid. Number two, there is abundant evidence that many of the rock layers were laid down quickly, one after the other, without significant time breaks between them. This is important, so I've emphasized it. Between one rock layer and another, there are evidences that there was not a long time between one layer of rock being laid down and another coming on top of it. Or maybe I should put it like this. A lot of sediment was put down layer after layer, and it was done quickly without a long time passing before another layer of mud and sand and stones and rock was placed upon it and hardened. So without significant time breaks between them. And here are the evidences. What has been found in these rocks are preservation of animal tracks. Even the footprints of animals have been found in the rocks. Even that. It has not been erased. Preservation of animal tracks. Ripple marks, such as the evidence of water flowing. Ripple marks have been preserved in the rocks. Even raindrop marks are found in the rocks. And this testifies to rapid covering of these features to enable their preservation. Many of the same fossils remains are not in one layer of rock alone, but their preserved remains are in many different layers of rock. In other words, different fossils, well, the same fossils, that is the same kind of living creatures, whether it is the horse or whether it is the fish or whether it is some other creature of the same kind. Many of the same fossils remains are not in one layer of rock alone, but their preserved remains are in many different layers of rock, which again shows that the different layers of rock are not different periods of time, but the same period of time in which these living things, trees and animals, lived. Here are some more evidences that these living things, which are now fossils, were buried and fossilized fast. There is hardly any evidence of erosion. In order for erosion to take place, you will have to have some period of time passing to allow the wind or to allow water to make a significant removal of soil. But you hardly find that between one rock layer and another. Also, there is hardly any sign of soil formation. In order for soil to form, you will need some time to pass. But there is hardly any evidence of soil formation between one rock layer and another. There's hardly any evidence of animals digging holes into the ground. Like, you know, rats like to dig holes, rabbits like to dig holes, foxes like to dig holes. There is hardly any evidence of animal burrows, that is, the holes that animals have dug into the ground, which shows that there wasn't really time for any of that to happen. And roots, there's hardly any evidence of roots between one layer of rock and another, which show that these layers of rock must have been deposited or laid down in quick succession, one after the other, after the other, after the other. Now take a look at this rock. This is a rock. Now, to show you how large this rock is, these are people at the very bottom of this hillside. And this looks like a horse. But these are people. Now look how the rock is shaped. It bends over and there are no cracks. It bends over. Large segment of rock bent over and there are no cracks. What does this mean? Well, number 4 is explaining it. The radical or extreme deformation of thick layers of sediment without evidence of cracking or melting also shows how all the layers must have been still soft when they were bent. So originally this was soft. That's why it could just go over like that. It later hardened, but it was soft initially. If these were gradually formed, and this was the result, let us say, of earth movements like an earthquake, you would have cracks. Or if this was a volcano in the building, in the emerging of it, in its construction from the ground upwards, then you would have sign of melting. But there is neither cracking in the rock nor melting of the rock. There is no evidence of that. So all the layers must have been still soft when they were bent. Again, evidence of a massive flooding that took place. We come now to something else but related. Recent observations and experiments have shown that long periods of time are not necessary to explain the fossil record. It is the evolutionists who say that in order for rocks to form, you need a long period of time. Or in order for coal or in order for oil to form, you need a long period of time. Well, here are some remarkable observations and experiments that show that this is not so. Number one, there are many examples of rock forming rapidly. A clock, think about that. Did they have a clock in the ancient times, millions of years ago? Do any of you remember reading in history of any people in ancient times having a modern day clock? They would have had a sundial, but not a modern day clock. But a modern day clock, when I say a clock, I mean a clock that is obviously made in our time. A clock, a spark plug. Spark plugs are used in vehicles. They didn't have these kind of vehicles back then. They had the donkey, the horse, but they didn't have any spark plug. Horses don't need any spark plugs for them to move. It is engines that are found in motor vehicles that need spark plugs in order for the gasoline to be able to provide the energy for the engine to work. And keys have all been found in sedimentary rock. What are they doing in there? If these rocks take millions of years to form, then how come we have never heard of modern day clocks and spark plugs and keys having been used millions of years ago? In fact, they couldn't have been that long, because even evolutionists don't believe that human beings were around millions of years ago. The most they have human beings around is about 300,000 years ago. Yet you have a clock, a spark plug, and keys, all in sedimentary rock. And we know that clocks, spark plugs, and keys were not fossils from millions of years ago, but are recent inventions. John Whitmore, PhD, that is Doctor of Philosophy, who is Professor of Geology, said, long periods of time are not required to harden rock. Sedimentary rock generally consists of sediment, mud, sand, or gravel that has been turned into rock. Number two, evolutionary paleontologists. Now, a paleontologist is someone who studies the behaviors or the habits of people in old times. Paleo is from a Greek word that has to do with that which is old or ancient. And so a paleontologist is someone who does research on ancient habits of living. So evolutionary paleontologist, Dr. Philip Curry, and remember, he's evolutionary. He believes in evolution. Yet, even though he believes in evolution, he admitted that fossilization can take, quote, a few hours. If the groundwater is heavily laden with minerals in solution, the process can happen rapidly. Now, that's quite an admission for someone who believes in the theory of evolution. What does this have to do with Noah's flood? Bear in mind that when you read Genesis chapter 7, it says that the fountains of the great deep were broken up. A fountain is a spring of water. And we find that if they were broken up, that would release a lot of minerals right under the sea, and the sea would overflow onto the land along with the rain coming from the sky to provide enough water to cover the earth. And that water would have a lot of minerals from the seafloor or the ocean floor that had broken up in different places where there were fountains or springs. So this shows that in the flood of Noah's time, the water would have been heavily laden with minerals that had been dissolved in the water. And this would speed up the process of turning creatures that were buried by mud, sand, or gravel into rock. So even this evolutionist admitted that possibility. It can take a few hours, he said. He said the process can happen rapidly. And this is Philip Curry and Eva B. Koppelhuss in the book entitled 101 Questions About Dinosaurs, published in 1996, page 11. Let us look also at experiments. Experiments have shown that long periods of time are not necessary to explain the fossil record. Fossil fuels do not need millions of years to form. Now, that view about millions of years being needed for oil, for example, to form, is an evolutionary teaching. But experiments that have been done just a few years ago have shown that this is not necessarily the case. In December of 2013, it was published, scientists at the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory are claiming success in perfecting a method that can transform a pea soupy solution of algae into crude oil by pressure cooking it for about 30 minutes. Notice that. Pressure cooking it for about 30 minutes, not millions of years. Pressure cooking it for about 30 minutes. The process called hydrothermal liquefaction also works on other streams of organic matter, such as municipal sewage. The crude oil created is lightweight and low in sulfur and can be dropped into refineries that process fossil crudes. And this is the website. So you don't need millions of years. It can be done in 30 minutes by pressure cooking it. And if we consider that part of the process of Noah's flood involved the movement of the sea floor and the ocean floor and releasing magma, that is melted rock from deep down in the earth, and it coming up and heating up the surface of the earth. There would be a lot of heat. And when you think about the different layers of sediment being piled up on each other, and there is heat below the ground, then there would be a lot of pressure cooking that would be taking place in nature. So it doesn't need millions of years for fuels to be created underneath the ground. The experiment shows it only takes about 30 minutes. Number 4, the technology described as one that mimics nature, that is, imitates nature, produces oil in much the same way. I have put this in bold, in capital letters to emphasize it. Produces oil in much the same way that nature produces oil. but it is completed in around 30 minutes, just like was said here, instead of millions of years. They're still holding on to the millions of years, though they have experiments that contradict it. But they still admit the possibility of this happening in a short time. And this is where I got this information from. So recent observations and experiments have shown that long periods of time are not necessary to explain the fossil record. Now, God permitting, next week, we will continue to look at this. Recent observations and experiments have shown that long periods of time are not necessary to explain the fossil record. I will start at this section of the PowerPoint next week, God permitting. Okay, thank you all for joining. And do you have any questions or comments on what I have said?
No, sir.
Okay. If you do have any questions that come up later, you can email me and let me know so I can do my research
Sir.
and deal with those questions. Yes.
Why you ask a question I can answer?
Or can you go to the laptop on the teacher's desk and speak into the microphone there for me?
Sir,
Yes.
in the time of Noah's flood, you said that the fountains was broken.
Yes, broken up, yes.
Was there any volcano exist at that time?
Well, that would have been one of the factors that could have created volcanic action, because it is known that deep down under the Earth's surface, the Earth is hot, and it becomes so hot at a certain depth that the rock is actually liquid. That is called magma, M-A-G-M-A. And if there is any crack that goes deep enough, then that magma will come up and spew out onto the Earth's surface. And when it spews out onto the Earth's surface, that is called lava, L-A-V-A. And that is the beginning of a volcano. That is the beginning of the formation of a volcano. So when it says that the fountains or the springs of the great deep were broken up, now that was one great breaking up, because we're talking about the sea. There was just one sea at the time. Another time I can go into more detail to show how that was so. One dry land, one sea, and wherever there were springs feeding water into the sea and into the ocean, it was broken up. So that would have been a condition that could have led to the molten or melted rock being released and coming up and spewing out and getting mixed up with the flood waters and providing even more minerals to cause the sediments to harden quickly.
Yeah, that would occur after the water would have dried off the land.
No, that would have happened. That would have happened as part of the process of the flood coming. Because bear in mind, the creation of a greater whole would have released not only the magma, but would have released more water that was under the seafloor, because there was actually water under the seafloor that was springing up under the water. But now that there was a greater crack around that fountain, it would have released a lot more water. which would have flooded the land. So there was flooding taking place, not just from the rain itself, but from the springs that fed the seas, that would have caused sea levels to rise up over the surface of the land and flooded the land. Okay, well, I'm going to have to go to another class now. So Lord willing, whatever other questions you have, you can email me and let me know. I will send you this later on this afternoon.